Let me show you how your taxes are not only wasted by our public broadcasters, but are used against you to distort public debate, to suppress facts and to suppress robust debate, and to push their chosen political and ideological line on climate change. It's beyond a joke, really. As I've demonstrated to you before by reference to the science, the reports of the IPCC no less, and other sources, there's no way you can scientifically blame Australia's current drought on climate change. As you know, this is the land of droughts and flooding rains, and we've been hit by crippling droughts since European settlement, and obviously before that as well, and most drastically in the Federation drought. And we'll have to cope with severe droughts and floods so long as we exist on this continent. But the ABC is intent on making the link between climate change and the drought, even playing gotcha politics to force politicians to make a pointless concession.
I just want to test something with you there, because even then when I asked you about the changing climate, you said, well, the climate ever since we first tilled the soil. But the Treasurer who was out with you this week, he conceded that this drought is linked to climate change.
So do I.
Well, we accept the science around climate change. We accept that it is part of what is happening here today. Man is contributing to that, and the science has told us that.
So you accept that?
Totally, 100%. You can't run away. I live it. I mean, this drought in my electorate alone has been going for 8 years.
And to prove how misleading some of the public comments about the drought and climate change have been, I've shared with you this concise and strong assessment by one of the nation's leading climate scientists.
This may not be what you expect to hear, but as far as the climate scientists know, there is no link between climate change and drought. Now, that may not be what you read in the newspapers and sometimes hear commented, but there is no reason a priori why climate change should make the landscape more arid. And if you look at the Bureau of Meteorology data over the whole of the last 100 years, there's no trend in data. There is no drying trend. There's been a drying trend in the last 20 years, but there's been no drying trend in the last 100 years, and that's an expression of how variable the Australian rainfall climate is.
But at the national broadcaster, to borrow a phrase, it seems they can't handle the truth. They have ignored that assessment, not run it, pretended it wasn't made for weeks. But instead, their Media Watch show has slammed Sky News for running that analysis, and then they've organised and promoted a qualification of that statement from Professor Pittman. Have a look at last night's Media Watch.
So, does Professor Pittman actually believe there's no link? Well, no. Because last month, before Sky really piled on, a clarification was issued to say the professor had left out a crucial word.
And he fully admits he should have said there is no direct link between climate change and drought.
Yes, no direct link, but there's still a link, says Pittman, telling Media Watch.
Do hotter temperatures lead directly to higher evaporation and a higher risk of drought? No. But does global warming lead to changes in rainfall patterns that can lead to drought? Yes. This indirect link is clear.
And expanding on that link by telling us,
in some regions, this increases the risk of drought. In other regions, it decreases the risk.
That's the best the ABC can do, hey? They hang their case on pathetic semantics, the difference between no link and no direct link. And they also talk about the chances of one way and the other. Let's listen again to Professor Pittman. This is the assessment the ABC ignored until they could find a way to qualify and change it.
This may not be what you expect to hear, but as far as the climate scientists know, there is no link between climate change and drought. Now, that may not be what you read in the newspapers and sometimes hear commented, but there is no reason a priori why climate change should make the landscape more arid. And if you look at the Bureau of Meteorology data over the whole of the last 100 years, there's no trend in data. There is no drying trend. There's been a drying trend in the last 20 years, but there's been no drying trend in the last 100 years, and that's an expression of how variable the Australian rainfall climate is.
Now, what the ABC also ignores is what the climate scientist Bible says about drought. The IPCC Working Group on Drought says that the AR5 report stressed low confidence in global scale observed trend in drought. owing to a lack of direct observations, dependencies of inferred trends on the index choice, as well as difficulties in distinguishing long-term climate change from decadal scale drought variability. To be clear, throughout the IPCC reports, there are predictions that a warmer climate with its increased climate variability will increase the risk of both floods and droughts. Yes, more rain overall, more water in rivers, more floods, but also more droughts. Just little evidence of that happening yet, especially given these trends occur over centuries, not years. But you know that because I've mentioned it here before. Media Watch's Paul Barry, on the other hand, just cherry-picked some reports to support his Droughts Are Getting Worse campaign, lied to his audiences about me and others not checking the literature, and even pretended falsely that Professor Pittman's people had offered up new information. This is extraordinary behaviour from Barry. I mean, it's not as if he hasn't got anything better to do than to check a few facts. He is, after all, paid about $200,000 a year by taxpayers and has a full-time staff for this 15 minutes of television a week. That's about the same size staff he has to produce the staff he has to produce this 15 hours of television a week is about the same size as the staff here at Sky that produces 30 hours of live television a week for me, Peter Credlin, Andrew Bolton, Paul Murray. And this is the best they can do.
But seems Bolt, Kenny and Jones have blocked their ears because they're still treating Pittman's original quote as gospel, as we saw when Chris Kenny, for the second time in his show, played it to Labor's Matt Thistlethwaite.
The leading scientist in this area is Professor Andy Pittman from the University of New South Wales, and he makes very, very clear that there is absolutely no evidence that links the current drought to climate change. Matt Thistlethwaite, do you agree that you're wrong to try and associate bushfires and drought now with climate change?
Well, no, he did not agree, and no, he was not wrong. But why let the facts, or a clarification from the scientist you're quoting, spoil a good rant?
Well, he sure backtracked a bit. This is the climate campaign from Barry, isn't it? He's turning into the grandfather of Extinction Rebellion on the ABC, I think. He's got the ABC now blaming current bushfires and drought on climate change, ignoring the evidence and the science. And Barry pretends his program is as blind to rational thought. This program, he pretends, is as blind to rational thought and open debate as his is. Just for your information there, contrary to what Paul Barry and the ABC say, we contacted Professor Andy Pittman's office a week ago when we first reported his comments. We asked him for an interview and we were told he was too busy. We offered a follow-up interview the following day. No answer. Our offer remains open. We are confident that the professor can speak for himself rather than have his comments marshalled by the publicly funded thought police at Media Watch.